Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. To start, we need to imagine what the Arabian Peninsula was like before Islam. Before Islam, Arabia was a land of contradictions. On one hand, the desert tribes were fiercely independent, ruled by loyalty to king and ancient traditions. On the other hand, the Arabian Peninsula was at the crossroads of great civilizations. Mecca was the heart of this trade network, its bustling markets filled with goods from Yemen, the Byzantine Empire, Persia, and beyond. But Mecca was also the epicenter of spiritual chaos. The Kaaba, the sacred cubic structure that stood in the middle of the city, had become a temple to hundreds of idols. Each tribe had its own deity. Each family has its own patron god. Unity was an alien concept. Blood feuds and constant warfare were the norm, and justice, if you could call it that, was decided by tribal power rather than fairness. In this fractured society, the poor were forgotten, women had little to no rights, and orphans, the most vulnerable of all, were left to fend for themselves. It was a world in need of change, and that change was about to come, though not in the way anyone could have predicted. Now, let's transfer to the year 570 CE. A boy named Muhammad was born into the prestigious, but not particularly wealthy, Hashim clan, a part of the Quraysh tribe. From the very beginning, his life was marked by hardships. His father Abdullah died before Muhammad's birth, leaving his mother, Amina, to raise him alone. But tragedy struck again when Amina passed away when Muhammad was just 6 years old. An orphan in a society that prized tribal connections above all else, young Muhammad's future seemed uncertain. Despite his difficult beginnings, Muhammad was fortunate to be taken in by his grandfather, Abdul Muttalib, and later his uncle Abu Talib, both respected leaders within the Quraysh. Through them, he learned the importance of honor, loyalty, and diplomacy. But his experience as an orphan left a lasting impression, shaping the compassion and empathy that would define him in later years. As a young man, Muhammad earned a reputation for honesty and reliability, qualities rare in the cutthroat world of Meccan commerce. His nickname, Al-Amin, meaning the trustworthy, was no exaggeration. His ability to mediate disputes and remain impartial made him respected by both the elite and the common folk alike. It was through his work as a merchant that Muhammad met Khadija radiallahu anha, a wealthy widow 15 years his senior. Impressed by his integrity, Khadija hired him to manage her trade caravans. Their professional relationship soon blossomed into something more, and when Muhammad was 25, he and Khadija were married. Khadija was more than just a wife. She was Muhammad's confidant and closest ally. Their marriage was a source of strength and stability, and together they built a family, with Khadija bearing him 4 daughters and 2 sons, though both sons died in infancy. Though Muhammad was a successful businessman and a loving husband and a father, he felt a growing sense of unease about the world around him. The wealth of Mecca was built on the backs of the poor, and the city's social fabric was tearing at the seams. Greed, idolatry, and injustice ruled the day. To find solace, Muhammad would often retreat to a cave on Mount Hira, just outside Mecca. It was here, in the stillness of the mountains, that he could contemplate life, seeking answers to the questions that plagued him. Why was there so much suffering in this world? What was the true purpose of life? And who, if anyone, could guide humanity out of this darkness? It was during one of these retreats in the year 610 CE that Muhammad's life and the course of history was forever changed. At the age of 40, Muhammad found himself visited by a force beyond his understanding. The angel Jibreel alayhi salam appeared to him, commanding him to recite. Muhammad, terrified and confused, protested, I'm not a reciter, but Gabriel alayhi salam command came again and again until finally Muhammad spoke. The words he uttered were unlike anything he had ever heard before.
اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق خلق الإنسان من علق اقرأ وربك الأكرم الذي علم بالقلم.
These words would become the opening verses of the Quran, the holy book of Islam. But in that moment, all Muhammad felt was fear. Was he losing his mind, possessed by a spirit, unsure of what had just happened? He rushed home to Khadija radiallahu anha, trembling and uncertain. It was Khadija who once again stood up by his side, believing in him even when he doubted himself. She took him to her cousin, a Christian scholar's name, Waraqa ibn Nawfal, who confirmed that the voice Muhammad had heard was the same voice that had spoken to Musa, Sayyiduna Musa. Muhammad had been chosen as a prophet. Despite the reassurance from Khadija and Waraqa, Muhammad didn't rush to proclaim his newfound role. For 3 years, he shared his revelations only with a small, trusted group of family and friends. Among the first converts were his wife Khadija radiallahu anha, his young cousin Ali radiallahu anhu, and his close friend Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu. This small circle of believers would form the foundation of the Muslim community, or Al-Ummah. But as Muhammad's message began to spread, it became clear that it wasn't just about spirituality. His call for the worship of one God, Allah, was a direct challenge to the tribal polytheism that had long governed Mecca. Worse still, his teaching about social justice, the fair treatment of orphans and women, and the condemnation of greed threatened the powerful elites who controlled the city's wealth. The Quraysh, who had initially dismissed Muhammad's preaching as harmless eccentricity, soon realized that his message posed a serious threat to the status quo. As Muhammad's following grew, so did the resistance against him. The wealthy Quraysh leaders mocked him, harassed his followers, and in some cases resorted to brutal violence. Muslims who weren't protected by powerful families, like the slave Bilal radiallahu anh, were tortured in an effort to force them to renounce their faith. Despite the mounting pressure, Muhammad's followers remained steadfast, alhamdulillah. And though the persecution weighed heavily on him, Muhammad never wavered in his mission. His belief in the message he had been given, monotheism, justice, and compassion, was unshakable. After years of enduring persecution, Muhammad and his followers faced a critical turning point. In 622 CE, the city of Yathrib, later known as Medina, was in desperate need of a leader to mediate its internal tribal conflicts. They invited Muhammad to settle there, offering his followers protection. This migration, known as Al-Hijrah, wasn't just a physical journey. It was the beginning of the Islamic community as a political and religious entity. Al-Hijrah was a risky move. Leaving Mecca meant leaving behind their homes, businesses, and extended families. But it also meant a new beginning. In Medina, Muhammad wasn't just a spiritual leader. He became a statesman, drafting a constitution that established rights and responsibilities for both Muslims and non-Muslims in the city. For the first time, Islam wasn't just an idea. It was a social and political reality. But even in the Medina, life was far from peaceful. The Quraysh weren't about to let Muhammad and his followers escape unscathed. They waged war against the Muslims, hoping to crush them before their influence could spread. The battles of Badr and Uhud were fought in these early years, with the Muslims experiencing both stunning victories and painful losses. The Battle of Badr in 624 CE was a turning point. Though vastly outnumbered, the Muslims triumphed, alhamdulillah, against the Quraysh forces. a victory that they attributed to divine intervention. But the high was short-lived. Just a year later, and the Battle of Uhud, the Muslims faced a devastating defeat. Muhammad himself was injured and many of his closest companions were killed. Yet, even in defeat, Muhammad's leadership remained steady. He preached patience and perseverance, reminding his followers that their ultimate reward was not in this life, but in the next, in heaven, inshallah, fil Jannah. By 628 CE, after years of conflict, Muhammad made a bold move. He sought a truce with the Quraysh, the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, signed at a place just outside Mecca, established a 10-year peace between the Muslims and the Quraysh, though controversial at the time. The treaty allowed Islam to spread peacefully. More and more people in Arabia began to embrace the new faith. In 630 CE, after the Quraysh violated the treaty, Muhammad and his followers marched on Mecca. This time, however, the conquest was bloodless. And instead of seeking revenge against those who had persecuted him for so many years, Muhammad offered a general amnesty. He entered the city in humility, and one of his first acts was to cleanse the Kaaba of its idols, restoring it as a sanctuary for worship of Allah alone. By the time of his final pilgrimage in 632 CE, Muhammad had accomplished what few could have imagined. Islam had united the Arabian Peninsula under the banner of monotheism and justice. But before his death, Muhammad delivered one final message to his followers, his farewell sermon, which would echo through the centuries. In this sermon, Muhammad laid out the core principles of Islam, the sanctity of the life, the importance of equality, and the unity of all believers under the worship of one God, Allah. All mankind is from Adam and Eve, he declared. No Arab has superiority over a non-Arab, nor does a non-Arab have a superiority over an Arab. Shortly after returning to Medina, Muhammad fell ill. On June 8, 632 CE, he passed away in the arms of his wife, Aisha radiallahu anha. His death marked the end of an era, but his legacy had only just begun. Within a century, Islam would spread far beyond Arabia, touching 3 continents and leaving an indelible mark on world history. Today, Muhammad is revered by over 1.8 billion Muslims as the final prophet of God. His life, his teachings, and his example formed the foundation of Islamic faith and practice. But Muhammad's influence extends beyond religion. His message of justice, equality, and compassion continues to inspire people around the world, Muslim or not. Sayyidina Muhammad's legacy is not just one of religious revolution, but of social transformation. He challenged the status quo, advocated for the rights of the oppressed, and built a community based on faith and mutual respect. His message, though delivered from more than 1,400 years ago, remains as relevant today as ever. In the end, Muhammad was more than just a prophet. He was a man who rose from humble beginnings to change the course of human history. His life is a testament to the power of faith, resilience, and the belief that one person, armed with conviction and compassion, can change the world. And here, brothers and sisters, we reach our final stop of this short documentary. If you like the video, don't forget to click on the subscribe button. See you in another video. Salam.